And let's see what Melody's up to in the next chapter of Out of My Mind, Chapter 6. Mrs. Violet Valencia lives next door to us. Violets are purple, and Valencia oranges are, well, orange. Purple oranges are just plain unusual, and so is she. She's a big woman, about 6 feet tall, with the biggest hands I've ever seen. They're huge. I bet she could put a full-size basketball in each of her palms and still have room left over. If Mrs. V is, well, like a tree, then Mom is a twig next to her. I was about 2 years old when I first started hanging out at Mrs. V's house. Mom and Dad hardly left me with anybody at first, but sometimes their work schedules overlapped and they needed a third person to help out. Mom said Mrs. V was the very first visitor when I first came home from the hospital. The first person to just pick me up like any other baby. A lot of my parents' friends had been scared to even touch me, but not Mrs. V. Mrs. V wears huge flowing dresses. Must be miles of material in those things, all in crazy color combinations. Bubblegum pink, with fire engine red, with peachy sherbet, with bright cinnamon. And all shades of orange and purple, of course. She told me she makes the dresses herself. I guess she'd have to. I've never seen anything like them in any store in the mall, or any hospital either. Mrs. V and Mom used to work together as nurses in the hospital. Mom told me the children there had been crazy about her. She wore the same bright outfits in the premier ward, the preemie ward, the kids' cancer ward, the children's burn unit. Color brings life and hope to these people and children, she'd announce boldly, daring anybody to disagree, and I guess nobody ever did. I remember sitting on Mrs. V's porch that very first time. Mom and Dad looked concerned, but Mrs. V held me tightly and bounced me on her knees. She must have had a hidden microphone under those flowing clothes. She has one of those voices that can make anybody shut up, turn, and listen. Of course I'd watch Melody, she said with certainty. Well, Melody is, well, very special, Dad said hesitantly. All kids are special, Mrs. V had replied with authority. But this one has hidden superpowers, and I want to help her find them. We can't possibly pay you, it's what it's worth to us, Dad began. Mrs. V shrugged and said with a smile, I appreciate whatever you can give me. Dad looked sheepish. Well, thanks. I'll get that ramp finished this weekend. I just need to make one more trip to the lumberyard. Now that will be a big help, Mrs. V had said with a nod. Melody can be a handful, Mom had warned. Mrs. V lifted me into a chair. I've got big hands. We want her to reach her highest potential, Dad added. Ugh, gag me, Mrs. V said, startling him. Don't get bogged down in all those touchy-feely words and phrases you read in books on disabled kids. Melody is a child who can learn and who will learn if she sticks with it. Dad looked embarrassed, but then he grinned. All right, bring her back in 20 years, he said. So you'll have her home by supper time. So most work days, I'd end up at Miss Valencia's place for a couple of hours until Mom or Dad could get home. When I got older, I went over to Mrs. V's every afternoon after school. I don't know how much they paid her, but it couldn't have been enough. From the very beginning, Mrs. Valencia gave me no sympathy. Instead of sitting me in the special little chair my parents had bought for me, she plopped me on my back in the middle of the floor on a large soft quilt. The first time she did that, I looked up at her like she was crazy. I cried, I screeched. She ignored me, walked away, flipped on her CD player. Loud marching band music blared through the room, and I really liked it. Then she came back and put my favorite toy, a rubber monkey, a few inches from my head. I wanted that monkey. It squeaked when you touched it, but it may as well have been a million miles away. I was on my back, struck down like a turtle, and I screamed louder. Mrs. V sat down on the quilt. Turn over, Melody, she said quietly. Sometimes she can make her voice really soft. I was so shocked. I stopped yelling. I couldn't turn over. Didn't she know that? Is she nuts? She wiped my nose with a tissue. You can turn yourself over, Melody. I know you understand every word I say to you, and I know you can do this. Now roll. Actually, I never bothered to try very hard to roll anywhere. I've fallen off the sofa a couple of times, and it hurt, so I usually just waited for Mom or Dad to move me to a comfortable position. Look at how you're lying. You're already on your side, halfway there. Use all that strength and hollering energy you've got to take one more position. Toss your right arm over and concentrate. So I did. I strained, I reached, I tried so hard that I farted. Mrs. V cracked up. But slowly, I felt my body rolling to the right. Then unbelievably, plop! I was on my stomach. I was so proud of myself, I screeched. I told you so, Miss V said, victory in her voice. Now go get that monkey. I knew better than to protest, so I reached for it. The monkey was now only 2 inches from my hand, so I tried to scoot. My legs kept doing the opposite of what my head wanted them to do. I wiggled. I grabbed a fistful of the quilt and I pulled, and the monkey got closer. You're a smart little cookie, Mrs. V said. I gave the quilt another tug, and finally, the monkey was in my hand. I clutched it, and it squeaked as if it were glad to see me. I grinned, and it made me squeak again and again. After that workout, you must be hungry, she said. She fed me a vanilla milkshake first, then my vegetables and noodles. Mrs. Valencia always serves dessert first, and I always eat all my food, the healthy part and the yummy part too. It's our little secret. Mrs. V is the only person who lets me drink soda, Coke, Sprite, Tahitian treat. I love the nose-tickling burp. Mom and Dad mostly gave me milk and juice. Mellow Yellow is my favorite. Mrs. V even started calling me that. At Mrs. V's house, I learned to scoot and then to crawl. I'd never win a baby crawling contest, but by the time I was 3, I had learned to get across a room. She made me figure out how to flip myself over from front to back and back to front again. She was tough on me. She let me fall in my wheelchair onto pillows so I could learn how to catch myself. Suppose somebody forgets to fasten that seatbelt of yours, she said in a voice that sounded like she was chewing gravel. You better know what to do or you're going to bust your head wide open. I didn't want a busted head, so we practiced. She'd send me back home, tell Mom I had a good dinner and a good poop. I have no idea why my parents think that's so important. Then wink at me. I was like her secret mission. Once I started school, however, I discovered I was a much bigger problem than just falling out of my chair. I needed words. How was I supposed to learn anything if I couldn't talk? How was I supposed to answer questions? Or ask questions? I knew a lot of words, but I couldn't read a book. I had a million thoughts in my head, but I couldn't share them with anybody. On top of that, people didn't really expect the kids in age 5 to learn much anyway, and it was driving me crazy. I couldn't have been much more than 6 when Mrs. V figured out what I needed. One afternoon after school, after a snack of ice cream with caramel sauce, she flipped through the cable channels and stopped at a documentary about some guy named Stephen Hawking. Now, I'm interested in almost anything that has a wheelchair in it. Duh. I even like the Jerry Lewis telethon. Turns out Stephen Hawking has something called ALS, and he can't walk or talk, and he's probably the smartest man in the world, and everyone knows. That's so cool. I bet he gets really frustrated sometimes. After the show went off, I got real quiet. He's like you, sort of, isn't he? Mrs. V asked. I pointed to yes on my board, then pointed to no. I don't follow you. She scratched her head. I pointed to need on my board, then pointed to read. Need, read. Need, read. I know you can read lots of words, Melody, Mrs. V said. I pointed again. More. And I could feel tears coming down my cheeks. More, more, more. Melody, if you had to choose, which would you rather be able to do? Walk or talk? Talk. I pointed to my board. I hit the word again and again. Talk, talk, talk. I have so much to say. So Mrs. V made it her new mission to give me language. She ripped all the words off my communication board and started from scratch. She made new words smaller so more could fit. Every single space on my talking board got filled with names and pictures of people in my life, questions I might need to ask, and a big variety of nouns and verbs and adjectives so I could actually compose something that looked like a sentence. I could ask, "Where is my book bag?" Or say, "Happy birthday, Mom," just by pointing with my thumb. I have magic thumbs, by the way. They work perfectly. The rest of my body is sort of like a coat with the buttons done up on the wrong holes, but my thumbs came out with no flaws, no glitches, but just my thumbs. Go figure. Every time Mrs. V would add new words, I learned them quickly, used them in sentences, and was hungry for more. I wanted to read. So she made flashcards. Pink for nouns, blue for verbs, green for adjectives. Piles and piles of words I learned to read. Little words like fish and dish and swish. I like rhyming words. They're easy to remember. It's like buy one, get the rest free. Sale at the mall. I learned big words like caterpillar and mosquito, and words that follow crazy rules like knock and gnome. I learned all of the days of the week, months of the year, planets, oceans, continents, and every single day I learned new words. I sucked them in and I gobbled them up like they were Mrs. V's cherry cake. And then she would stretch out the cards on the floor, position me on a big pillow so I could reach them, and I'd push the cards into sentences with my fists. It was like stringing the beads of a necklace together to make something really cool. I liked to make her laugh, so I would put the words in wacky order sometimes. The blue fish will run away. He does not want to be dinner. She also taught me words for all the music I heard at home. I learned to tell the difference between Beethoven and Bach, between a sonata and a concerto. She'd pick a selection on a CD and then ask me the composer. Mozart. I'd point to the correct card from the choices she set in front of me. Then I'd point to the blue on my board. Huh? She asked. When she played a selection from Bach, I'd point to the correct composer, then once again to touch the color blue on my board. I also touched purple. She looked confused. I searched around for the right words to explain what I meant. I wanted her to understand that music was colorful when I heard it. I finally realized that even Mrs. V couldn't figure out everything in my head. We kept going. Sometimes she'd play hip-hop music, sometimes oldies. Music and the colors it produced flowed around me as easily as her clothing. Mrs. V took me outside in all kinds of weather. One day, she actually let me sit outside in the rain. It was steaming hot, and I was all sticky and irritable. Must have been about 90 degrees outside. We were sitting on her porch, watching the storm clouds gather. She told me the names of all the clouds she had made up stories. I knew that later she'd have the names of every kind of cloud on word cards for me. Big old Nimbus up there. He's black and powerful and can blow all the other clouds out of the sky. He wants to marry Miss Cumulus Cloud, but she's too soft and pretty to be bothered with such a scary guy. So he gets mad and makes storms, she told me. Finally, old Nimbus got his way and the rain came down on me and Mrs. V. It rained so hard I couldn't see the porch. The wind blew and the wet coolness of the rain washed over us. It felt so good. A small leak on Mrs. V's porch let a few drops of rain onto my head and I laughed out loud. Mrs. V gave me a funny look and then hopped up. Do you want to feel all of it? She asked. I nodded my head. Yes, yes, yes. She rolled me down the ramp Dad had built, both of us getting wetter every second. She stopped when we got to the grass and we let the rain drench on us. My hair, my clothes, my eyes, my arms, my hands, wet, wet, wet. It was awesome. The rain was warm, almost like bath water. I laughed and laughed. Eventually, Mrs. V rolled me back up the ramp to the house where she dried me off, changed my clothes, and gave me a cup of chocolate milk. She dried off my chair, and by the time Dad came to pick me up, the rain had stopped, and everything was dry once more. I dreamed of chocolate clouds all night. That's the end of the chapter, so add a response and answer the question about what we read about.